So a lot has been made about where the left should go after Bernie's two consecutive defeats. And after every defeat, we, the left, we have dutifully have gotten to work to elect progressives all across the country at every level of government. And I know as DSA specifically, we have elected hundreds of progressive Democrats. And yet, I think what we're afraid to admit is that not much has changed. We've elected many Democrats, as I've already said, and you ask the average person on the street what has changed, and most of them will tell you not much. Despite the fact that we have elected so many progressives, it's now a mainstream thing to be progressive. And so I think we need to come to face with that truth very soon, especially if what we seek to do is achieve power to get our goals done and change society for the better. So I do think that we've underestimated how adept the Democratic establishment is at co-opting the ambitious. I think we've underestimated the careerism that builds when you have a movement that gets a little taste of power. And I think we underestimated the structure that forms a party. Because I think political parties, they exist for a reason. They are a vehicle that houses the possibility for political change. And so by the fact that we lack a party of our own, we're always going to be fighting with one hand tied behind our back whenever we come up against the establishment. And we can hitch a ride, to political power via the Democratic Party. But by hitching a ride with them, you'll always guarantee that you'll have zero control over the destination of that vehicle. Because you hitched a ride with them. They didn't hitch a ride with you. And it's really hard to wrestle control of a vehicle when you're extremely outnumbered and you're nowhere near the steering wheel, and you have to face widespread resistance to allowing people like yourself inside of the vehicle. So I think it's time for us to get our own vehicle. And it's not like this hasn't been done before. Long ago, not that long because this country's not that old, but a bit ago, the US was dominated again by a two-party system, the Democrats and the Whigs. And both parties at that time had refused to confront the scourge of slavery in America. And so a party rose that would champion abolition rights, right? Would champion the abolition perspective when no one else would, when no other party would do it. And we know that party's name. That party's name is called the Republican Party. And I think it's time for us to do it again, to build a new party. So I think what I propose to you is that if there is no party in this country or in this state that will champion the bottom of the pyramid and the overwhelming majority of the people in this state who toil under duress for the benefit of our new self-appointed nobility, then I think with these hands, we need to build that party. A party that's going to carry the hopes and dreams of hundreds of thousands of people in the state. A party that can promise, and a party that will deliver. Thank you everyone for coming, and I'll just move right along to introducing our speakers. So my good friend Tony Unger here, he's the co-chair of the Rhode Island DSA. Dan Piper, a teacher and a 2020 candidate for the Connecticut House of Representatives. He comes to us from Workers' Voice. And then we have Liam Easton-Calabria, the finance organizer for the Kshama Sawant Solidarity Campaign from Socialist Alternative. And if you don't know who Kshama is, she was elected as an independent in the Seattle City Hall, I think maybe like 2 or 4 years before Bernie ran the first time, and she was elected as a socialist. And then we have my other good friend, former state senator Cynthia Mendes. yeah, I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to make their remarks.
Great, thanks Kinverly. Like Kinverly said, I'm Tony Unger. I'm one of the co-chairs of Rhode Island DSA. Very pleased to be here with my comrades and pleased to be representing one of two mustaches up front here today. Can't speak to the quality, but of mine. So yeah, I would say the point and what I'd like to get across is the perspectives of Rhode Island DSA as they've grown out of our experience organizing both electorally and in other spheres over the past couple of years. So this event is even more timely now than when we planned it. Between Joe Biden's high-profile opposition to do a ceasefire in Gaza, to the Rhode Island Democratic Party's utter refusal to deal with our state's extreme crises in healthcare and rent prices, even the most moderate progressives are being led to serious questions about the nature of the Democratic Party. I admit it was similar experiences that drew Rhode Island DSA to ask this question internally. When I first joined the organization, the old school DSA wisdom was that working with Democrats was a sign of pragmatism, of worrying about action over ideological purity. But as I and many of my comrades began to experience the results of supporting candidates on the Democratic Party line, this idea turned out to be a pure myth. By DSA standards, our electoral campaigns were a wild success. Our chapter ran 6 endorsed candidates in 2022, 4 of whom were elected, a record that beat some explicitly electoral organizations in Rhode Island. As time went on, however, we realized that simply electing candidates is not a success in and of itself. Our electives, even the most committed socialists among them, experienced extreme pressure to moderate their views, and some of them did. The others remain under constant attack by members of their own party, including the threat of organized primary challengers. This isn't something localized to our chapter. Many of the most important DSA electeds in the country have moderated their views to the extreme. For instance, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's vote to prevent railway workers from striking, or Bernie's indefensible warmongering during the ongoing war in Gaza. The temptation in both these cases is to blame individuals. That is, to say that Bernie and AOC, maybe they just didn't cut it. But given the right situation, given the right leaders, maybe, just maybe, we can sway the Democratic Party to a socialist agenda. And this idea has a long history, tracing back to Michael Harrington and Bayard Rustin. But unfortunately, this strategy failed in the 1960s, even with a much stronger labor movement and a somewhat less reactionary Democratic Party. And in present circumstances, the justifications for trying to do that are even more hazy. The Democratic Party, ironically, does not even have internal democracy. Even if a significant amount of Democratic politicians were to be swayed to socialism by some miracle, the top-down nature of the party means that the establishment Democrats could destroy any opposition. In fact, this has already happened in Nevada in 2021. Socialists won control of the Democratic Party there and took control of its formal structures, but the outgoing conservative Democrats took the membership lists, technological tools, and donor and consultant networks with them. As a result, socialists were soundly crushed. And it won't be possible to change the minds of Democratic Party leaders either. The largest donors to the party at all levels are from major business interests. I know that socialists can be persuasive, and I like to flatter myself, but between me and $1 billion, who's going to move Chuck Schumer? Between Rhode Island DSA and $100,000 of real estate money, who's going to move Joe Shekarchi? In our experience, the reality is that the Democratic Party cannot be an effective voice for workers, and there is practically no chance that it ever will be. So where does that conclusion lead us? It leads us to the conviction that workers need a democratic political organization to fight for their own interests, separate from and opposed to the capitalist class. Thank you. Thank you. So, to bring it back to a Rhode Island DSA context, at our chapter convention last May, we committed ourselves to taking the first steps towards building that party here in Rhode Island. We have decided to endorse and run only independent socialist candidates for local races, but more than that, we've laid out a long-term party-building plan. Research and organizing are still underway, but we will run our first independent socialist candidate for Rhode Island political office by 2026. We've recruited a significant amount of volunteers who are ready to work in canvas for this campaign, and we've built a prototype van-like voter database, thanks mostly in part to our comrade Brian Flowers in the audience. But we're not going to stop there. That's not enough. These are just the first steps toward building the party that I described earlier. There's a lot to talk about in terms of intermediate strategy, which we'll get to, I think, in the Q&A section. but I'll conclude by just listing out the 10 principles that we passed for such a party. First, a commitment to defeat capitalism through class struggle. Second, oppositional politics. Our party will not make alliances with capitalists or their politicians. Socialist politicians will avoid backroom deals and instead will fight for reforms by calling out corrupt officials, unmasking the capitalist system, and encouraging mass movement. Third, electoral accountability. The party's politicians will understand themselves to be delegates of the membership, accountable to the democratic decisions of the general body, and bound to the party platform. They will not accept a salary higher than that of the average worker in their district and will donate any remainder to the party. Party members will be able to vote to withdraw support from a politician at any time. Fourth, a broad membership rooted in the multiracial working class. Membership will be open to anyone who agrees with the socialist mission of the party. Fifth, a base in the labor movement, which gets towards one of the questions we'll be talking about later. The party needs to have strong ties to a large section of unionized workers who eventually must be willing to strike for political demands. Sixth, democratic decision-making. Membership will collectively determine the actions and policies of the party, and party officers will carry out the resolutions voted on by members. All party officers will be elected, recallable, and again, paid no more than the average worker's wage. Seventh, freedom of opinion. Members will be free to debate, disagree with party decisions, and form factions when they wish, while respecting the will of the majority which determines party policy. 8, social institutions. The party will remain present in members' lives year-round through political education, social clubs, and forms of support such as childcare, and not just come around every couple of years when they need you to vote for them. 9, democratic funding. The party will be funded exclusively by membership dues, not corporate money or corporate-affiliated NGOs. And 10, internationalism. Our party will aim to be part of one world socialist movement extending beyond Rhode Island to the rest of the country and globally. So, what are we fighting for here? It's just and necessary, a decent life for all people in Rhode Island and in the United States. What our success hinges on is the work and support of people like you all. The movement to build this party is already underway, and the only question is, will you help us build it? Thank you.
Well, I'm in the right room. Those were excellent remarks. I'm very happy to be here. Some of the things you say, so I just want to clarify, when I ran for state rep, I was not running as a Democrat. I was running as part of a Socialist Resurgence, which is a party that has merged with Workers' Voice and created a merged Workers' Voice. And we had run two campaigns for office in our branch before this time. This was the first time, though, that one of our candidates happened to be in a union, and I had been pretty cautious in my union activity prior to this point because I didn't want to alienate myself. And running in 2020, though, and also I was aware that things were relatively conservative in my school, and people were generally pro-administration, collaborative with administration. In 2020, though, things got so bad with COVID that people were really pissed. And we sort of wondered what would happen if I'm running as an open socialist. Would my coworkers sort of think this was a weird thing? Would they kind of turn away? And not only did they get really excited about the campaign, but they said, hey, you should be the building rep. We need someone who's going to fight here. And I said, okay, I can do that. But the meetings that we had before this were just 10-minute meetings for the union leadership to report on what the union, a third party, was doing. And I said, we got to have real meetings if we're going to organize and improve conditions in the school. And the first meeting we had, before anything starts, one of my coworkers gets up and says, all right, before we do anything, we have to agree that none of us is going to leak any of this to administration. And everybody was in unanimous agreement. These are people who had never organized before in their lives. And they understood that if they were going to be successful, that meant that our conversations not only could not be conversations with the boss, but they had to be secret from the boss. Now that is elementary class consciousness. You can't win a strike if your meetings are meetings with the boss. You can't organize a union if you're letting the boss into your union meetings. How are you going to organize a party that is going to win anything for you if that party is organized with the boss. If that is your orientation, you are confused about what class is. Now, I want to talk about the current situation that was referenced here by my brother right here. Now, it's not just Biden, right? Sanders is leading the charge to continue the offensive on Gaza. And it doesn't just endanger us because this man is in office. It endangers us because people listen to him in the movement, and they listen to him in the movement because of us. We right now have the most historic mass worldwide movement in defense of Palestinian rights that this world has seen thus far. But where is it going to go if what we're calling for is a ceasefire? We had a ceasefire. And Sanders said, well, Hamas can't be trusted to keep the ceasefire. And Biden said the same, and Israel said the same. And lo and behold, they're bombing Gaza again. If we cannot call for an unconditional hands-off Gaza, if we cannot call for an unconditional end the siege and U.S. aid to Israel, how is this movement going to continue? It is going to run aground, and it is going to disperse like so many before it, that dispersed not just because people went to vote for Democrats at the end of the day, but because they adopted the program of the Democratic Party. Now, people like to support the Democrats because they say, well, you've got to be pragmatic and you've got to be practical. And let me say this. If you believe that, there are one of two, or probably actually two, falsehoods that you believe in. One is that working people are so ground into the dust that they cannot emancipate themselves, that they cannot fight for themselves. The other is that working people are so privileged that they cannot emancipate themselves. And people believe both of these things. And the fact of the matter is, on an average day, both of these things are true for different sectors of the class. But they are not true all of the time, and history, and by that I mean my own lifetime, not to mention lifetimes before that, show numerous cases where workers rise above their day-to-day conditions and fight for previously unthought of things. And where workers who are privileged fight for those who have far less privileges than them in unprecedented ways. I want to discuss one such example and one contrasting example. And that goes back to the early days of the working class movement in England during the American Civil War. Because during the American Civil War, 80% of the cotton that was going to British textile mills were being blockaded by the Union Army. What was the response of English workers? Did they say, well, this threatens our jobs, we've got to support the break of the blockade, we've got to support the South? No. They said, we will not touch cotton that comes to us from the American South. And they campaigned to prevent the blockade from being broken, and they campaigned for the victory of the Union Army against the South. And they did this because they understood that they were not simply fighting for higher wages, they were not simply fighting for a little bit of economic security, they were fighting for the emancipation of all mankind. And if they were going to fight their own boss, which was one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen, they were going to need solidarity from the world. A counterexample to this is the Irish immigrant workers in the United States, who not only rioted against the draft, but in their opposition to the draft, targeted African Americans in the United States. Now, how do you explain the difference between these two groups? There's a lot one can say. I'll give you one major distinction. The British workers could not yet vote. The Irish immigrant workers in the U.S. could vote, and they had already been corralled into the Democratic Party, and that party had tied its program to their aspirations and thus pitted them against their most natural allies. And this party has more practice doing this than almost any other party in human history. Now, the right to vote is a victory. What it means is that we have an additional challenge, and that is breaking the program of the working class from the program of the bosses. If you want to understand where Mr. Sanders falls in this, I recommend looking at his 2015 speech about what socialism means to him. Because he spends a third of that speech talking about the threat that ISIS poses and the need to fight ISIS. Now, why on earth would a socialist talk about the threat of ISIS and the need to fight ISIS? Well, there's a clue in one other part of his speech, where he talks about the 1944 State of the Union address that Franklin Delano Roosevelt made. He discusses many lofty ambitions that Roosevelt makes for working people. Economic security, the right to a house, the right to a secure job, and so on and so forth. Now, it's interesting because in Lincoln's time, the offer made to workers was not the right to economic security, it was the right to run your own life. It was the right to land. You got this land from the indigenous people, but that was what he could promise. That's what he offered. You get the right to a piece of land, you get to work on that land, you control your working conditions. If you work harder, you get more wealth. By Roosevelt, it was simply, you get the right to work for somebody else. But now, in this speech, amidst all these lofty dreams, there's one very concrete proposal, which is, and I'm quoting here, a national service law which for the duration of the war will prevent strikes and with certain appropriate exceptions will make available for war production or for any other essential services every able-bodied adult in this nation. In other words, he was calling for the military conscription of labor, the right of the federal government to take any person in this country, send them anywhere to any job it wanted, and if they didn't like it, they were committing treason. This is the example that Sanders cites. What he says in this speech is, you, the American working class, have a challenge, which is to win the loyalty of the working class. And let me tell you, us reformist socialists, we can get it done for you. We don't even have to get workers much at all. We can simply promise a few things, and they will fight and die for you, and they will kill their brothers and sisters abroad. That is not a strategy that wins. If you want to fight ExxonMobil, Walmart, Amazon, these giant multinational companies, you're not going to win on the city council level. You're not going to win on the national level. You need to be fighting for the emancipation of all humankind, and you need to make everyone on earth who is exploited and oppressed your ally, and you need to rally them to fight with you to defeat this beast. There is no other way. And for all practical purposes, this beast is now heating the earth at 5 atom bombs per second. And those gains that were promised this generation, last generation, the generation before, will seem all the more impossible the longer they stay in power. So, I'm going to be done.
I didn't prepare an opening statement, but I just want to say I'm really happy to be here. Again, my name is Liam, Easton-Calabria. I'm coming from Connecticut today, but I was the finance organizer in Seattle for the Kshama Solidarity Campaign, and prior to that was heavily involved in the 2019 re-election campaign for Kshama Sawant, who is a socialist city councilor. One socialist out of 8 Democrats, one socialist and 8 Democrats on the city council. And Kshama was first elected in 2015, and I think, it's really important to have this story brought to the panel today, because I think Kshama Sawant is one of the best examples of independent politics thriving in the U.S. I think I really like what, is it Dan? Mm-hmm. What Dan said about the capacity for working people to get organized and to fight. I think that has been on display in Seattle since 2013, when we were first elected on the platform of a $15 minimum wage, a platform of taxing Amazon, and a platform for rent control in Seattle. And this is a super exciting development with this chapter of DSA running independent candidates. I think it's something that's needed all across the country with DSA, with other left groups, with unions even. Unions should be running their own candidates. And I think part of what was, Tony, part of the platform of kind of what DSA is putting forward right now, oppositional politics, is absolutely crucial because I think we've seen time and time again with Kshama Sawant in office that you absolutely need to display the class character of the fight in front of you, clearly explain why the Democrats in the Seattle City Council voted 1 week for an Amazon tax in 2018, and then the next week, after backroom deals, repealed it. And this was a vote that was put forward by Kshama, by a movement that really wanted to tax big business in Seattle for affordable housing. And using open, independent politics where you're not tied to the establishment, we were able to explain exactly what happened. That Amazon turned around, pressured the city councilors in backroom deals, incredibly undemocratic exertion of power, and they caved to this capitalist logic of Amazon's going to pull out of Seattle, their threats, they're gonna tank the economy, and of course they didn't. But we were forced to return and rebuild the movement to tax Amazon, which we did in 2020, which I believe was 4 times larger than the tax that passed in 2018. And that was built on the back of the BLM movement. It was built on the back of the BLM movement, of the outbreak of COVID-19, showing people exactly who runs society. I think it became very apparent, that essential workers, I myself was an EMT and an ER tech during the pandemic. There's been an awakening since the pandemic as to who's on our side and who actually runs shit in this society. And I think that it's always been the time to form an independent party from the Democrats. They've never, in the last, many decades, they've never been, a viable option for the socialist movement, for the progressive movement, for the cause of labor. But I think that now they're completely showing themselves with the war on Palestine, the war in Gaza, with gaslighting the American people into thinking we have a good economy when we know we don't, one that doesn't support us. And I think, I'm just incredibly excited to be here and talk more about, bring some of the experiences of the Seattle City Council office out in this panel, because there's a lot of rich lessons there.
Hi all, I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm Cynthia Mendes, and I wanted to give a little bit of a different perspective, one that's unique to me and my experience, but not unique to the struggle of running an insurgent campaign, being in office and being an independent voice in office. I want to acknowledge a couple of things as I share. I have a couple of notes written down, but it's really thoughts that I had, and as I was jotting down these thoughts and feelings, I actually started with a sense of gratitude that I have a lot of amazing people in my life that I was able to work these thoughts out. And now we're at a place where we get to do it together in a forum, which is beautiful and incredibly important, and it shows a turning point. I also want to acknowledge that this conversation is coming at a very particular point in my own evolution. So if we had this conversation 5 years ago, it would be different. If we had it 2 years ago, it would be different. If we had it 10 years ago, I don't know if we would have that conversation at all. But we're here now, and at a very important time in history, and yeah, so I just kind of wanted to share that, and also some gratitude for the people that have mentored me to bring me to this point. Janine Calkins here, Senator Janine Calkins, the person, I mean, I wouldn't have had this experience and been in office if it wasn't for Janine. And then the struggle of what do we do now after we witness insurgent campaigns and progressive Democrats in office and getting our asses handed to us? What do we do with that? What happens after that? And being able to have really honest conversations about, is this working? Is it working well? And is it working for the most vulnerable and the oppressed? And Andrew and Kinverly and Devorah are three friends that I've siloed separately, had conversations with. So again, I just wanted to say that we're really lucky to have a conversation like this on this scale. It's really important. I want to share a few things. The first thing I want to share is just kind of the struggle of what it takes for a marginalized working class person to run for office. Before we even get into, I want to share a little bit about my struggle when I was in office, what if you get in, but just to get there, right? To run an insurgent campaign as a Democrat, as a progressive Democrat, right? First of all, there's recruitment. We're not told that we should run for office. No one's out saying that we should run for office. No one's teaching us how to do that. The party picks their people, and it's a baton that they hand off to the next person and the next person and the next person. So just the fact that we should be in office and representing ourselves is a novel idea, and you cannot just canvass this area. It does not occur to people. Ballot access is the next hurdle. So after you get people to believe they can, that they have a fucking shot and that they should do it, and that they have the right to do it, the party, the way it's structured now, is that if you are endorsed by your town party committee, you get a little star by your name and you don't have to go and get signatures. The rest of us who don't have that relationship with the party, you have to go out and gather signatures, right? So just to get your name on the ballot. Then we have redistricting. We don't have to talk about gerrymandering, but we can for a little while. And Rhode Island, for those that don't know, we recruited and paid, I think it was over $1 million we paid him to come up here, a consultant that was the king of gerrymandering, to come up and redo our redistricting for the party. And this person came up and met with senators privately in a private room to talk about, and with a map, to kind of map out how they want their district to look. So even if you were to run for office, the party dictates that demographic and has, when they've recruited somebody, they have a district that is amenable for that person. So in 10 years they'll change it on you. So just when you've built up enough power within that district, they'll rewrite the district lines. We can talk about money, big money. We have PACs, super PACs. The establishment heavily funds their candidates. They will throw fundraisers for you, and they just passed a bill this past legislative session to increase the spending limit to $2,000. So now they'll get all their buddies, and then so we have the funding. We know all of these problems. Van access. One of our colleagues, Sam, fought very hard for protections there, but you have to protect your data, because for a very long time in this state, the party, if you ran as a progressive, you ran as an insurgent, you were not picked by the party would steal your information from your voter information. So when you canvassed, they stole your data. And this is all while you're trying to learn how to run for office and you were not picked. So these are just some of the barriers. They're not opposed to lying about you, so that's not off the table. They will do that. They will play very loosey-goosey with their campaign finances, but will comb through yours to find any problem with yours, and good luck trying to find a lawyer that will kind of help you. So it is a painfully intense process, and I want to identify that the party, while you have a D by your name and you're running with the party as a progressive, the party is actively and mobilizing against you in a way that they are not doing, and in Rhode Island I want to be explicit, not doing against Republicans. Actually quite the opposite. One of my best friends, Maura Wall, she was a rep. She was, the party picked a Trump Republican to run against her and endorsed him to run against her. Another one of my dear friends, Jennifer Rourke, who won her primary when she had a general election, there's a Republican in office right now because the party said, well, she's too much of a problem, she's too independent. We're gonna support on the DL the Republican to win. So they mobilize and they use all of their power against progressives in a way that they would never and have never used against Republicans. So that's just a snapshot of some of the hurdles. But then, the final week, right? You're running the GOTV, you're getting people out to vote, you're no sleep. And finally it's election night and the numbers come in and you win. Immediately, your phone starts to ring. And all of the same people that were lying about you, that were talking about you, that were donating to your opponent are calling you to congratulate you, to tell you how eager and excited they are to work for you, to work with you, not for you, to work, they only work for one person, to work with you. And it's jarring because it's on the same night. And I just want to take you through this journey of like this struggle, and all of a sudden day one, these friendly people start to call you, and then you get a call from either the Senate President or if your House, the Speaker's right-hand person, and they tell you that we're going to be caucusing. You're part of the caucus, you're in. The Democrats are going to caucus now, and it's going to be private, and we're going to talk about our leadership. We're going to make a vote. And there's conversations about that, and all of a sudden now you're in it. That caucus is private. It usually takes place in a room like this, and it is expected that you vote on leadership, and you are to vote for the current Senate President, the current Speaker, Whip, etc. And that's all done behind closed doors. There's a public vote that happens on the floor, but this is when folks caucus. And if there's any wind of the fact that you may not vote, and you're trying to whip votes against the Senate President or the Speaker of the House, you will be deeply discouraged. People will talk to you and tell you you'll never get a bill heard, that you will get a primary, that nobody will be your friend. This is your time to fight for you. What would your constituents think? There is so much guilt, so much pressure right from day one. So you go into the caucus. For folks that cannot be persuaded, you have to go into this room of people, some that are trying to charm you and some that are being quite mean to you, and cast your vote. I will give you just a quick snapshot. We'll be mindful of the time here. We did encourage, when I ran, we encouraged somebody to challenge the Senate President, and it was not an easy feat. And some of this person's very dearest friends in the Senate, people that she worked with for a really long time, would not vote for her out of fear, because a fear of retaliation. So the vote failed, and everybody that did not vote for the Senate President was ostracized. And when you go into office, so what does ostracized look like? It means that your bills did not get hearings. Some of my bills got lost. Some of my friends' bills were given away. If it was a really good bill and people really liked it, all of a sudden one of the Senate President's buddies got it, and it got heard. Your name wasn't on it. They would make rules. The other thing that would happen is a committee assignment. So the Senate President would tell you what committees you're on and where you'd be able to serve. If he doesn't like you, then you'd be put on really horrible committees, and no one would share any sort of information kind of with you. These are just some of the tactics, but I want to pull back on a personal level really quick to talk about how this power is kind of wielded on a psychological level. We all like to be liked. We are socialized to be liked. We are conditioned, our reptilian brain says your survival is connected with each other. And if you enter a room and people are looking at you like they don't like you, your survival mode goes off, because that's not healthy for you. That's what your reptilian brain tells you. And so there is a lot of psychological pressure just to walk into a space where people are intentionally mean to you. I'm going to name names. So Senator Josh Miller is a person who was supposedly supported Bernie. He says that he's a progressive. He wheels and deals with big pharma and the hospitals and medical corporations. He tried to be close friends in the beginning, and when I wouldn't change my mind on who I was voting for Senate President, he was not happy with me. And then later on, and I'll end with this is just one story, when he found out that he could potentially get a challenger in his district, and he did meet with a redistricting person to make sure that any challengers were carved out of his district. I went on the Senate floor and I spoke about this tactic. And I didn't name him, but I named this tactic of having your opponents carved out of your district, and I named some people that were carved out of their district. And after the Senate, he came up to me in my face with his finger in my face, just yelling at me once the cameras were off on the Senate floor. So there's a sense of bullying and being attacked. And if you there's a psychological point where you're wondering, why am I enduring this? In addition to that, it's not broadcast with the exception of a few independent journalists that cover these things. No one knows, your constituents do not know that you are fighting tooth and nail and being bullied on every single, they do not know how hard you're fighting for them, only to be primaried. And then what happens, I'll end with this, is what happens is at the end, they pick somebody to run against you. Your constituents don't know how hard you fought for them. And they will go and canvass your district and go, she was too loud, she didn't do anything for y'all. Don't you want somebody that can get it done, can work within the party and can get things done? She didn't do anything for you, she didn't accomplish anything. Well, that's because they didn't pass any of your bills or introduce them. So there's an intentional manipulation within the party. There are three options when faced with an institution that wields this much power. It's voice, exit, or loyalty. You can exercise voice for a little while, but it's not sustainable. And ultimately, people choose loyalty or exit because the party retains and wields power. Until you build power outside of that party, those will continue to be the three choices of any progressive that chooses to run an insurgent campaign, is to get into office as a Democrat and exercise voice until you get too tired or you get run out, and then exit or loyalty. And we've seen it over and over again.
Yeah, thank y'all for your introductory remarks. So I guess I just would like to start with asking y'all why agitate for a party right now? And then since we're in a union hall, what do you think the role of labor would be within a new party?
Well, I can speak a little bit to why it makes sense to agitate for a party right now. I think one of the things that Dan brought up that I thought was super salient is that, we believe that people are incapable of action, and, for the two reasons that you listed, either because they're too conservative or they're too beaten down, right? And as he said, both of those things can be true at different times, but a party is a means to repoliticize people's lives. People have all of these isolated complaints. They think things are only happening to them. They think that their boss is just being a dick in their workplace. The party is a place where you can kind of coalesce those complaints. We can say, this isn't unique to you. This is a feature of the system. This is a place where, we can talk about these issues and formulate a strategy. So without a party that is truly independent and takes those issues seriously, not as a means of buying people's votes, but as a means of resolving those problems in and of themselves, you need a party. You need a place where people can act sort of together. That's the principle of unions that work. The solidarity forever. What force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? The party brings people together, and it's a necessary precondition for people to have a voice.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use the quote. I want to use a 19th century thinker who had 20th century or insight, whose ideas give us insight into the 20th century, Frederick Douglass. He said, "He who can say to his fellow man, 'You shall serve me or starve,' is a master, and his subject is a slave." So in other words, he was saying wage slave is not a metaphor. Now, how is that situation maintained today on a global scale? Well, on one sense, by the ownership of the world, but how is that ownership maintained? Through the state, through states all over the world. And because our situation is maintained politically, we have to organize politically or we're sunk. That would be my first answer to that question. And the way the Democratic Party organizes is it says to the citizen worker, we can get you a concession, but you're going to have to forget about the immigrant workers. To immigrant workers, it says, you know what, you can get a path to citizenship, but forget about these other people who don't fall in line with that. Whereas a working class party says, all of us or none of us. And it unites every single struggle at every single point that it can. And that's not an easy thing to do, but this is not an easy struggle to win. So that would be my first answer. Role of labor, I'd say this kind of party is going to come about one of maybe three ways. One is a party with a working class program is successful enough to organize the working class under its banner. That's happened in some countries. In France, Germany, Russia, things went in that direction. In Russia, that was successful for a period of time. A second way is a movement within the trade unions wins the idea that trade unions need to organize their own party. And a party is formed out of trade unions that is accountable to its union membership, and where it may or may not have a revolutionary program, but such a program can be won. A third way that can happen is one of the oppressed nationalities in this country has in it such a movement that a party is formed. And so I'm talking very specifically about Puerto Ricans, African Americans, or Mexican Americans, or Chicano. There's a variety of different terms that people have used over the years. And such a party in that case would also have to be independent of the Democrats, the Republicans, the ruling class. And for one of those parties to succeed, it would need a working class leadership, even if it doesn't start with one. So in any one of those parties, unions are going to be essential for victory, but they may be the arena in which such a party is formed. They may be it may be the starting arena, or it may be the ending arena where such a party is formed. But in either way, the elementary organizations of the working class would be essential to such a party.
Yeah, I think I touched on this a little bit in my opening remarks, but the why now? Again, I think every second that goes by is a second wasted in organizing an independent party of the Democrats and the Republicans. I think particularly in this moment, some unique features of consciousness right now, I think, are really kind of witnessing a rebutting of the labor movement, especially among the youth. And this is really exciting and bodes well for progressives and the working class movements moving forward. But I think it's really a result of youth finally facing the disillusionment with Democrats, with the Republicans, and turning to labor as a response, because they've been let down. We all have, and it's not just the youth. There's, across the board resurgence. But I think it really is this continual disappointment that is feeding both this leftward shift towards unions, or towards the the functional battle units of the working class, unions fighting contracts, but also towards the right. And I think the rise of Trumpism is, a direct effect of, really the letdowns posed by, the 2008 crash, Obama bailing out the auto industry and not working people. And that just compounds over time as defeats continue. And I think really, there are so many existential crises in some ways that it seems like it maybe never has felt as acute as now, given the climate crisis. I think Obama hailed himself as the drilling king on live television at one point. But in front of another audience, hails his climate practices. It's all a game to them, and truly it is the overarching existential threat of humanity. So I think really trying to pull ourselves away from both parties that refuse to let fossil fuels go is incredibly important. But also just any party that coalesces, even if it's not in power. Any party that is built on labor movements, built on social movements, with a program that is appealing to working people who are poor, who need medication, who are struggling to educate their kids and work 2 jobs at the same time. Any party that is drawing those people with a program is going to keep people from joining Trump, from joining the far worse than Trump, that is yet to come. So I think. There's never been a moment like now, super excited to build this. One thing that I did want to touch on, I think, is the role of labor unions. Historically, labor has been incredibly important to the building of workers' parties. It's in the name, I think that in a contract battle, which is essentially where the tensions in union and the bosses lie, you really do kind of expose who has the wealth in society, who does not. And these high profile, we all just saw UAW go on strike. These high profile battles are not just for the workers in the union, but also for all to witness. Real class victories. UAW workers earned, I think on average like a 25% raise, which is, in the given state of the labor movement in the last few decades is incredibly significant. And I think that, these continuing to build, like all of us, we need to be deeply involved in the cause of labor, continuing to build these high profile militant strategies, even going further than what UAW did and going all out on strike, and actually causing the bosses to lose profit that quarter. There was more room, to be done, and labor, giants like Ron Carey in 1997 at UPS, have shut down, massive amounts of GDP moving truly on a global scale, and that kind of shows exactly what the power of labor is. And I think that labor unions really, have moving forward can run their own candidates, can support the socialist candidates in, the independent candidates that DSA, the Socialist Alternative that new parties run, even before we have this kind of mass coalescing of a party. I think it's one of the fundamental key features of a new party.
Why agitate now for a party? For me, it's probably very similar for a lot of people. I've seen what I need to see. And truly we're in a moment where people have seen everything they need to see. We have had multiple awakenings, but we understand what power is. We also understand deeply what abuse is. We know what it feels like to be abused, and we can't hide it anymore. And so people have seen what they need to see. We've seen everything that we need to see, and we understand that we're running out of time. So I think the agitation is already there. I think it's right. I think they've broken it. That people are already agitated, and they now just need to be kind of like directed and mobilized, because we're hearing, thanks to the labor movement, a real, true understanding again of what solidarity means. So not only this is the right time now to agitate for a party, because we've seen what we need to see. We've been broken in every way. The promises have been broken, our backs have been broken, our pockets have been broken, our hopes have been broken, everything's been broken. So yeah, I mean, they did the agitating for us. We just need to now move and mobilize. And I think we also understand the elements of power and what it looks like when it's wielded well in solidarity, and what can happen, and also what it looks like when it's abusive. The last thing I wanted to say about that is the institutions that have failed us, the institutions that we have struggled with, and we are talking about political institutions. My background is actually in organized religion, so there's religious institutions, but a lot of these institutions that have been around for hundreds of years and thousands of years have some basic elements in them in the way that they hold and maintain power, and the reason why they've been here so long. And they call it different names, but it's usually the same couple of elements. There's a creed. There's something that everybody, when you say you're a part of this, everybody signs on. And this is one of the ways in which they've built power and retained power. And when you do that, you have community by doing that, by signing on. So you are a Democrat, you are a Christian, you are whatever. When there's a creed, and then you instantly get community. There is a moment where you make that decision. You have to decide that you are a part of that. And then you get, you're policed within that community, right? There's standards that are maintained once you say you're in community. Now we conduct ourselves a certain way, we live a certain way, we behave a certain way due to that creed that now we are all conducting ourselves with. And so there's some correction there. And then there are also consequences. And so for those of us that have run insurgent campaigns, that have tried to be a progressive, although that's a moving target consistently, right? And so I refuse to use that anymore. The Democratic Party will usher consequences to you when you do not comply with how they police you in community, right? And if you suffer the consequences to the nth degree, you lose community, you lose identity, and you are out. Right? And there is accountability from them. And that is true of organized religion as well. And so to understand the tenets of power, to fight for labor, to fight for marginalized people, to fight for working class people and oppressed people within an institution that has all of those things and those power, and you are surrendering to it, is foolish in my mind now. It's absolutely foolish. And so to agitate for a party is to agitate to have these things separate unto ourselves, defined by ourselves, wielded by ourselves, and expanding that in solidarity for other people.
I'm realizing now that I forgot to say anything about labor, which of course is very, so with your permission, Kinverly, I'll say about a minute. I have literally a minute. Okay, I just blew 5 seconds, sorry. So obviously unions are not as straightforward concept as they might sort of appear from a political perspective, right? The sort of principle of business unionism is very, very predominant in US unions, which is the idea that you can solve, that in fact class struggle is just a surface appearance, that what's good for workers is what's good for bosses, and that we can kind of mediate and get together. So in some ways unions, you have to go in with a strategy, right? Like unions will not naturally lead to an explicitly socialist party. That's something that actually has to be thought about by workers and has to sometimes be introduced and have an argument made for. So I'm wary of a DSA tendency, which is to credulously believe unions and sort of forbid any kind of contradiction of them. Unions are great, unions can be very important, unions can be wrong, and frequently are. UAW, and especially lately in the ILWU, are great exceptions, but the rule is predominantly strict business unionism, and we have to be very careful about working in that context.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you guys so much. So because we're kind of running very tight, I'm just gonna ask one more question, and then I'll open it up to you guys to come up and ask questions that you're wondering. And then I'll ask everyone to please keep their remarks to like 2 to 3 minutes. And I mean like 2 to 3 minutes, no thesis. So I guess I would like to ask, what do you guys say to people who say, you know, I really love this idea of a third party and an idea of like a working class party, right? But we need electoral reform before that happens. So we need to have like a parliamentary system, or, you know, whatever obstacle people put in front. And then before, you know, they're okay with like engaging in a project of trying to build a new party. And these same people will also say, well, right now we're only capable of electing people through the Democratic primaries. So yeah, what do you say to these people who are basically like, we need electoral reform first, and right now, we should focus on Democratic primaries?
Well, yes, yeah. I'll try to keep it even shorter than that. Well, first, I mean, you hear this very frequently. It's a fundamental historical misunderstanding. It just has no basis in reality. The electoral reforms are won as part of an organized socialist movement, an organized progressive movement. These are not prerequisites for socialism to succeed in an organized way. These are the results of it, right? So if we organize, I mean, this is true of electoralism in a broader way. We do not just organize to win elections. We organize to change things. And you can change things whether or not in the short term you are winning elections or not if you have a big enough movement. So it's classic, like, okay, we can have a revolution, we can actually make things fair for poor people, but actually you're going to have to wait 30 years for these magical conditions to appear out of nowhere. No, we start organizing now. As crazy as it may sound, we do it. And the results will come. There's never any guarantee of success, but we have to try now and not wait for them to, you know, be given to us by God or you know, Dan McKee beforehand.
Yeah, when you run for office, you are running to be a member of an institution run by the enemy class. It is not your institution. You cannot expect to be treated fairly. In fact, the more successful you are, the more unfairly you will be treated. So the first guy we ran for office, well, he was fired from his job. He was a Catholic school teacher, and he was brought in, and the priest said, and this is not somebody he saw on a regular basis, you ran for gay marriage and for the right for a woman to abortion, and so you're being fired. Now, we were not prepared enough to fight for his job because, unlike a normal job, Catholic Church can fire you for violating their beliefs. When Allende, when he took office, he thought, and he said explicitly, the military is loyal to the Constitution, not to the businesses. And he found out that was not true. And they bombed the government buildings to get him out. When the Bolsheviks ran candidates, they were arrested, and they had mobilized people to get their candidates out of jail. You don't run people for office to manage the boss's institutions for them, to manage them better. You run people for office to organize your class's movement to overthrow those institutions, to end them, to dismantle them. To dismantle the police departments, the courts, the military, the entire hierarchy and the apparatus that keeps the conditions in place now that are destroying the world and enslaving humanity. So, for that reason, you don't wait for them to reform their own system, right? That's not going to work. You run in whatever conditions you get. You expose the hypocrisy of their own democracy. You show that it's not what they say it is, and you use it as a place to point the way forward for your class.
Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I would just generally like to echo a lot of what's been said. I think that, you know, we all understand that there's no real democracy right now in our country. Any country around the globe, you know, is not interested in actually representing the opinions of working people. And there is desperately needed changes, and we should all be fighting for electoral reform. But I would wholeheartedly agree that this is part and parcel to building an independent party that is willing to challenge the people in power who are keeping us from making the changes that we need to see. And I think that also, especially when this is brought up in the context of independent politics, I think at the root of the question when people are asking, don't we need to wait for electoral reform, is this fear of splitting the vote. Like they want ranked choice voting, which, you know, can sometimes be seen as putting your first choice forward and then going for the second best instead of letting the Republicans win. And I think we just really need to challenge this idea that splitting the vote is going to lead to the rise of the right, because it's exactly the opposite. It's if we stand strong in our principled beliefs and actually organize working people, if we actually create a base, a mass movement, a political party that, even if it's not in office, is propelling forward the labor union struggles, is propelling forward social movements. If we had a party that gave Black Lives Matter like an actual organizing backbone, those types of things would lead to incredible societal shifts, the likes of which we saw. Abortion was won under a Republican Supreme Court, Republican presidency in the 70s. These things, are incredibly possible, but we need to start now. And so I think tackling that root assumption that we can't split the vote is incredibly important, and being very confident and vocal about needing to have a polar opposite to the Republicans, even if we're not always in power or initially in power. And then I would also just say that, first past the post electoral politics, we've demonstrated in Seattle that 4 elections in a row we've won, basing ourselves on mass movements, basing on ourselves, on the fight for $15 minimum wage, which we tied to inflation. So is now in 2024 going to be a $20 minimum wage in Seattle. Fighting for BLM, fighting for rent control, and exposing the Democrats all along the way is crucial. Is a crucial part of the process. And I'm going to leave it there because I'm running out of time.
Yeah, to advocate for electoral reform, I think is insulting to people that understand how abused they are, right? First of all, it's like playing whack-a-mole, because there's so many things that you hit one thing and you focus and you organize on one thing, and then they've gutted something else. And it's a way that they keep you with the goalpost moving, and you're on this hamster wheel and you can't do anything. So it's a bait and switch, it's a game, and it's deeply, deeply insulting to those that have been abused by power. And so it is the position of enablers, to be honest. So if the current power structures are abusive power structures, those that say we have to rely on electoral reform, so they're going to change this time, is an enabler, and not one I don't really have time for.
Okay, yeah, you guys did good. Keeping to time, but I really wanted to give you guys time to ask questions. So do we have any takers? All right, I guess we'll take Dean and then the person out there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you can.
I just wanted to touch a little bit. Stand up. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a couple of points that were raised. One is the building. How difficult it is or would be to actually build a working class party. And yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Well, that's why they call it a movement. That's why, the building of the civil rights movement was very tough. The building of the anti-war movements were very tough, and the building of a working class party is going to be very tough as well. However, I like to harken back to the old way that we used to elucidate it in when I was just coming up in the socialist movement, and that was the slogan of build a labor party based on the trade unions. And it's like, why? Why should we build a labor party based on, well, the very fact of the matter is that the unions are the basic organs of working class power. And the union movement has the wherewithal, beginning with, because of their structure and organization, to help us build an independent movement, an independent labor party. So that's why I think that that the labor movement has a very, very strong basis to help us build such a working class party.
Oh, okay. It was a remark. Okay, yep. And, you know, just to let you guys know, this is going to be a rapid question, rapid response, meaning rapid response.
I'm getting better.
My name is Nick Giannone. I'm a union boilermaker and member of the Workers' Party of Massachusetts. Thank you for putting this together. I'm glad to see the leftists coming to a consensus about the Democrats instead of the endless debate. I don't know what took so long, but I'm glad it's getting there. The Workers' Party of Massachusetts in 2024 will be going into our third election cycle of running candidates. We've run people on the legislative level, state level. In 2024, we're going to be running someone against Elizabeth Warren.
She's really annoying, so thank you.
You cannot spell Warren without war. It's been very rewarding going out, taking a revolutionary socialist program outside of leftist comfort zones, going into working class communities across Massachusetts. It hasn't been a strain on other organizing work. It's actually strengthened it. Going out, take a program out to a random stop and shop somewhere in the middle of a working class community and talk to people about socialism. You will be surprised at how rewarding it is. I'd like to offer our help with anyone thinking about running next year. We have, especially in Massachusetts, we have experience dealing with campaign finance, all of the electoral hurdles, signature gathering, using the state electoral list to reach out to people. But the one question I wanted to ask is, you have a great program of moving forward in Rhode Island. I'm really impressed with what DSA is doing, but why wait until 2026? Where I feel like we're already starting behind, and we can use all the experience we can get as a movement. Why wait is my question.
Rapid response?
Rapid response would be to say that it's not simply a matter of worrying that we're not going to succeed. I mean, if you run candidates, some of them will lose. That's just the way that it shakes out. The bigger infrastructural thing is to make sure that losses are not demoralizing and don't demobilize people, right? So if you're in the context of an individual campaign, I mean, we saw with Bernie, you lose, everybody dissipates, everybody's gone. What the precondition for us, even more than any sort of specific things, is to have an organization that is capable of weathering those and using those defeats to be mobilizing rather than, just to be another force to grind people into the ground. That's the hurdle. I think we're close, but we set ourselves a generous time frame.
I can't speak to that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, not everyone has to answer the question. All right, so I guess you're gonna go next. Ryan, and then we'll take Jonathan, and then we'll see if we have time for you.
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Evan with Workers' Voice Connecticut, rank file Teamster. I was wondering kind of specifically about the experience in the DSA also, and I have a broader question, but basically I'm wondering, you said your decision as a branch or chapter or whatever you guys call yourselves to break with the Democratic Party kind of came from very direct experiences. I'm wondering if you see this in other places around the country with the DSA, with that sort of decision making, and what you see as like kind of the way forward, and specifically also like what your experience has been with other like comrades in the Democratic Socialists of America, either like positive or negative like reception to the decision, because just I'm interested in like your reflections on that. And then like kind of like in a bigger context for all the panelists, like what has been your experience like in the labor movement, in the kind of communities that you're like canvassing in, trying to put forward like an alternative political representation in like what's your experiences like positive and negative, like both for like the people that are, I mean, you know, it's a long question, so you don't have to answer it all, but both for the people that are canvassing and also, you know, in the communities themselves. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll sort of let other panelists add to the broader context, and I'll talk specifically about context with DSA. So it's been very mixed, right? So clearly the break with the Democratic Party is the cutting edge of DSA, and that's where more and more people are tending, right? So we've gotten really good reception from other chapters that are on the same page. Shout out to Worcester DSA. You know, those are our brothers and sisters, kind of, you know, like the Providence-Worcester connection. I mean, there's also been a lot of very negative stuff. At National DSA Convention, when I made the same I think pretty mild criticisms of Michael Arrington and realignment, a guy threatened to punch me in the face. And an older gentleman from El Paso, who I believe thought he was more of a gunslinger than he actually was. So this is certainly I think that more and more chapters are realizing it's just not the right way forward. It's not a way that works. There's practical concerns and severe theoretical concerns. But the point is, DSA is not going back. We're not going back. It's only forward, and that's the way that things are moving. And I can say that with 100% confidence.
First off, hi Nick. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Been a while.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to speak to this question of what it's like to do an independent campaign. It is astonishingly great. Like, I absolutely agree. You go to a Stop and Shop, you go to any place where working people are, you go to especially a demonstration, but you even go to middle-class neighborhoods. And it's shocking how, and we started doing this in 2010, when the Tea Party was like, that was the movement going on at the time. You wanted to take a contact out and show them that socialism was viable. You took them to anywhere with our program, and they would meet people who identified as socialists before that was the new thing to do. If you're doing political work with working people, it aligns astonishingly well. We had members who were working in hotels and organizing unions in those hotels, and we took our candidate down to big union demonstrations, and everyone would introduce themselves on the bus. He would say he was at the time it was the Socialist Action Candidate. Socialist Action Candidate. Everyone would cheer, and everyone would want to talk to him, and people were upset we didn't give them more time to talk to our socialist candidate. And we later had him speak at their union hall about the socialist perspective, and these are people who, you know, they were coming from Colombia, they were coming from Haiti, and a little more advanced class politics than a lot of the native-born workers, and, you know, it was a very good way to meet people. Like I said, my own workplace was thrilled that there was a teacher running and actually talking about the problems that COVID was creating in the schools that no one was talking about, and wanted me to lead the union, right? You take your candidate to a picket line and you promote the strike or you promote a labor action. Those workers really appreciate it. And I'll just say, every time we've run, we said, look, we're not running, our purpose is not to take office, our purpose is to take power. And that's a much more long-term thing. So, like, no one is demoralized when we don't win. That's not, because we don't set them up for that. Because if that's your whole orientation, then you're opening up your campaign to opportunism. I'm not saying winning is not a good thing. That opens up all kinds of other possibilities. But if that's the necessity, then you're not ready to do it.
Yeah, this is a great question because I think part of the, really one of the cornerstones of our success in Seattle has been a really, really strong canvassing ground game. And I did it for both elections, but having a really systematized and strategic canvassing program, I think was pretty crucial. We were canvassing in District 3, which is majority renters, Kshama's district. Working people are busy. Working people have a lot going on. And so even despite, a lot of people being very open to socialism, or a lot of people being very open to, shitting on the Democrats. It required a very specific program to build the mass campaign that we did and to get the number of donations that we did. For the last campaign, we ended up raising over $1 million. And that was I just really want to reiterate this, that's kind of like what Bernie did, what Bernie really successfully did, and what Cornel West is failing to do right now is to build on a very concrete campaign. You basically heard Bernie Sanders and you hear Medicare for all or $15 an hour. And that's exactly what we did with Kshama Sawant in Seattle. We started canvassing very early, much earlier than any Democrat started their campaigns, hosting tables out in District 3, talking to working people out. We don't have Stop and Shop in Seattle, but QFC or, any number of areas that, people are walking around and really trying to engage with people and not settle for, once we get their attention with, $15 an hour or what it be, tax Amazon, really not saying that's enough and really saying, we want you to get involved in our campaign. We actually need you to donate, and we actually need you to come volunteer with us. If you support these, demands, if you support this cause, then this is your campaign, and we have a room for you in a volunteering capacity as like what you can give. And I think being confident enough in working people to know that they're gonna be able to make that decision for themselves and not be able to be afraid of asking for $50 or $10 or whatever pocket change that you have, I think it was a crucial element to our campaign.
I don't have too much to share to add to this because I'm kind of new and young to this particular conversation. I will say that people in my district and people that I talk to are deeply looking for a sense of accountability to hold elected officials accountable, and I think that the current way of endorsing candidates as DSA candidates, but having them be Democrats and watching them just turn their backs on us, whether at our local level or congressional level, and not having any power to hold them accountable is... So not having any power to hold them accountable is compelling to everyday people who are self-selecting themselves out of the process because they just they don't feel that there's any way to hold them accountable. So, and in the current structure of just endorsing candidates and sending them off into the Democratic Party, hoping that they're going to be coming back and voting the way that you expect them to, has failed people. And so I think it's compelling and would be very compelling to folks that feel a sense of despair and a lack of power of truly being represented. And I can definitely tell, say in my district and in my community, people I've talked to, that they definitely would be excited about that.
Yeah, I guess Ryan, you can go, and I'm gonna cut, unfortunately, your response time to 2 minutes now.
You can interrupt like this.
I mean, yeah, it's gonna have to get to that point. And folks who are asking questions, immediately get to your question.
We have a question from Russ on Zoom here, who wanted to know your thoughts on how we can build a labor movement that centers rank and file voices rather than getting caught up in the bureaucracy.
2 minutes.
Yeah, boy, I mean, if you have an answer to that question, like you unlock the key or whatever. I mean, I think that I think that is largely, again, tied up with a broader sort of socialist movement. I mean, I think one kind of difference that I may have from other things is that it's like unions are not neutral territory. Like it's not as if union bureaucracy is won out on an equal playing field. I mean, they're there, and conversations that are happening among rank and file people are occurring in that context. So I think that, you know, in cases where rank and file disagree with leadership, there has to be some sort of organization outside of the union and outside of strictly union membership that can provide support, can help them strategize. I mean, I think that TDU is doing a great job in many regards, but it's a complicated question.
So our orientation is towards building what we call a class struggle left wing in the unions. And I know that sounds like someone said to me, that's what everyone wants to do. But the idea there is that the bureaucracy is not just some unfortunate phenomenon. There's an enormous amount of pressure for the union leadership to collaborate with the bosses. And you're not going to solve that by simply electing new leadership, because the same pressures are still there. And so you need to create a political level, a space in the unions that have a political level that can organize people around questions that make it, that outflank and counteract this massive pressure to adapt to the bosses. So one of the ways to do that is to run independent socialist candidates who raise that consciousness in the trade unions. Another way to do that is to involve your union member, your co-workers, your brothers and sisters, your siblings in the movement, in the labor movement, in causes that go beyond bread and butter issues. So talking about Palestine, organizing people around climate change, organizing to stop deportations, organizing people into protests against police violence. Without that kind of political consciousness in the unions, the bosses are going to be able to maintain that pressure that creates a collaborationist leadership.
Yeah, I think you know, the union bureaucracy is one of the biggest impediments to class struggle right now, and it's pretty evident that, yeah, the ties to the Democratic Party are incredibly clear. I think the Democrats got, like, I think it was $250 million from unions in the U.S., like all across the board for the 2020 election. And that is direct union membership dues going to Democrats for their re-election campaigns and for maintaining relationships with the Democrats, which a lot of labor leadership views as, you know, a crucial element to succeeding, which is completely foolish. And I think, you know, there is this rising militancy. We saw, you know, Striketober happen, where rank and file workers were rejecting, you know, at John Deere, I think they rejected 3 contracts in a row that their leadership put in front of them, and they said, no, you go back in there and fight for us. And I think that in a very different way from the Democratic Party, who has no organizing space that working people can actually get involved in or advocate. You know, there are no Democratic Party meetings. Unions are very different, and they are, they can be brought back into class struggle, and we actively need to fight for them to come back into class struggle. But I think that's partly needs an immediate call needs to be to stop spending our damn dues money on Democrats. It's pretty incredible. And you know, looking at the top salaries, you know, of union presidents and union administrations, you know, some of them are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and most of them make well over what their average union member makes, you know, and that is a system for creating unaccountability and, you know, a cozy relationship with the boss when your own leadership is isolated from your own working conditions and your day-to-day work life, because they're not working on the shop floor with you, they're not at Starbucks with you, So I think those two things immediately are, really things that socialists shouldn't shut up about. We need to be actively, calling for these things. And even if you're not a socialist, you're a union member, and your union member dues should be going towards, people who aren't going to turn around and screw you. So that's what I think.
I'm actually
There you go.
yeah, you covered it.
Thank you. John? Yeah. And John's going to be our last question before we get to the food and drinks that are in the back. So I'm pretty excited to get to that as well. We're going to set up more tables, so don't worry.
All right. I'm Jonathan. I've been in DSA Rhode Island for a couple of years. Based off of that experience, I've noticed that a lot of the time political activism in Rhode Island tends to be almost exclusively focused and based in and immediately around Providence. So my main question is, okay, if we're trying to create an independent workers' party as the solution to all of our problems, how do we actually make that something that extends to all of Rhode Island rather than just where we're all based?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that's a great point. Like, a lot of Rhode Island-based organizing is very Providence-centric. I think that's a kind of a boring answer to that question. Maybe it's a matter of building up the organization, right? We only have so much capability to do things, so we do them where we can. I mean, one thing that I think is really interesting would be opening up and broadening our labor circles program, which is a Rhode Island DSA thing. You can ask me about it later if you want, or Ben, who knows a lot more about it. The guy in the blue. To other cities. I mean, certainly the geographical extent could grow. It's a matter of recruitment, and it's a matter of marshaling our resources smartly. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just want to echo off of that. It takes, intentional work and outreach. Having this meeting here is a perfect example. Also, there are folks here today, which I won't point them out, but folks that have come in from RIC campus and CCRI campus, from us going out and flyering and talking to folks. And so I think being intentional about building caucuses where students and marginalized people are working class people are, and empowering them to go into their own communities and then back to Cranston and Coventry and Warwick and all over to go ahead and mobilize. But I think moving into places like CCRI, RIC, and really empowering folks there to be able to go back into not only their hometown and their city, but then also, there's social workers, nurses, and are now equipped to organize in their field as well. And thank you to anybody that did come from RIC and CCRI. I won't call you out, but happy to see you.
All right, well, yeah, we've made it to the end of our time. So thank you guys for coming through. As I've stated, there's some food and drinks in the back, and we'll set up more tables that you can sit at. But yeah, and thank you to the panelists.
Dan.
What?
I just wanted to make a couple announcements. So when you come back here, you'll see on the tables there's a sheet where if you're interested in volunteering with our electoral efforts, or even have someone in mind that you would nominate to possibly run for office as an independent socialist, we have a form that you can take a picture with a QR code or type in the link, and we'd love to have you guys sign up. And we're not, someone's asking about 2024. We haven't ruled out doing 2024, so it would be a matter of finding the person and a district or city council board that would be appropriate for that. But really encourage everyone to sign up and come back.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, it's really important that folks sign up. I know a lot of people think that they can't run for office. I ran for office. I didn't know what I was doing. I literally only had 3 months, and I still got 1/3 of the vote. and I only campaigned for 3 months and had no clue what the hell I was doing the entire time. So like, don't think that you cannot be the person to run for office, because have you seen the people at the State House? They're not smart. Like, they're not any better than you. They just have connections. But we're prepared to marshal resources to get people elected who want to run as independents. Or if you know of anyone who you think will be a great person, just fill out the form and also sign up as a volunteer, because we're going to need a lot of people to get folks elected. An independent campaign requires more resources than, you know, running as a Democrat, because the Democratic Party already exists. So you're using their structure. But thanks, Dan, for reminding me. And yeah, guys, get some food, and thank you to our panelists for coming through.